The morning air in London was cool and fresh, with a light mist hanging around the tall gates of Buckingham Palace. The palace stood grand and silent, as it had for hundreds of years, with its white stone walls shining under the weak sun. People from many countries gathered outside, cameras in their hands, voices rising with excitement as they prepared to take pictures of the famous royal guards and their magnificent horses. For many, it was a dream come true to stand before the palace gates and watch the old tradition with their own eyes. Among the large crowd that day, a small group of tourists stood out. They were not like the quiet families or respectful visitors who admired the scene in silence. Instead, this group was loud, careless, and eager to draw attention to themselves. At the front of the group was a tall man wearing a bright jacket, his sunglasses perched on his nose even though the sky was covered with thin clouds. His voice was sharp, and every word he spoke carried across the crowd. He laughed louder than anyone else, made jokes about everything he saw, and acted as though the place was built for his amusement alone. His friends and companions followed his lead. Some of them giggled nervously, not wanting to upset him, while others found his boldness funny. They did not notice the way older visitors frowned at them, nor the looks of disapproval from families who wanted to enjoy the atmosphere. The arrogant man smirked and nudged his friends as he pointed toward the guards standing perfectly still on their horses. "Look at them," he said in a mocking tone, his words dripping with amusement. "They're like statues. Do they even move? Do they even breathe? What a job, to just sit on a horse all day and do nothing." Some of his friends laughed, though not all of them seemed comfortable. One of the women in the group whispered, "Maybe we shouldn't be so loud. There are signs everywhere saying not to disturb the guards." But the man brushed her concern away with a wave of his hand. "They're not going to do anything," he said, puffing out his chest. "They're just there for the tourists. Everyone says the guards never move or react. Watch, I'll prove it." The group walked closer to the railings, leaning forward to get a better look at the black horse standing tall and calm. The animal's dark mane shone under the soft daylight, and its muscular body looked powerful under the weight of the shining uniform and armor. The royal guard sitting on top wore the traditional red coat, tall black hat, and polished boots. His face remained firm, eyes forward, hands steady on the reins. The horse shifted slightly, its ears flicking back and forth, but it did not break its training. The crowd around the group grew quieter, sensing that the loud man might try something foolish. Mothers pulled their children a little closer, not wanting them to get too near. An older gentleman shook his head in disappointment, whispering to his wife that disrespect like this spoiled the beauty of such a tradition. Yet no one said anything directly to the man. They simply hoped he would stop before he went too far. But the man enjoyed being the center of attention. He smirked as he noticed people watching him, and he raised his voice even louder. "See how close I can get," he boasted to his friends. He leaned toward the horse, clapping his hands together suddenly to startle it. The horse flinched just slightly, its large eye turning in his direction. The crowd gasped softly, but the guard remained perfectly composed, his grip on the reins steady. The arrogant man laughed, delighted by the reaction. "See, he moved. That's all it takes. They're not so tough, are they?" His friends laughed along, though their laughter was nervous, their eyes darting from the guard to the horse. A few of them stepped back, sensing the danger of standing too close. But the man stayed in place, almost daring the guard to react. He waved his hands in front of the horse, making silly noises, as though the animal were part of a circus show. Nearby, a young boy no older than 8 clutched his mother's hand tightly. His wide eyes were fixed on the scene, fear written across his small face. "Mom," he whispered, "why is that man doing that? He's scaring the horse." The mother leaned down and hushed her son, pulling him back from the railing. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Just stay back. The guard knows what he's doing." The boy nodded, though he kept watching, clearly unsettled by the rude behavior. The horse shifted again, its hooves clinking softly against the cobblestone ground. The sound echoed in the silent tension of the moment. It was clear to many in the crowd that the animal was growing uneasy, yet the arrogant man only saw it as entertainment. He grinned and turned to his friends. "Did you see that? He's nervous now. They can't even keep the horse calm." The group of friends exchanged uneasy glances, some no longer laughing. One woman tugged at the man's sleeve. "Come on, that's enough. Let's just take some pictures and go. Everyone is staring at us," but the man ignored her plea. He loved the attention too much, and the disapproving looks from strangers only fueled his arrogance. He raised his phone to take a video of himself, speaking loudly as if he were a show host. Here we are, folks, at Buckingham Palace. The guards are supposed to be so strict, but look how easy it is to get a reaction from their horses. They're just for show. His voice carried far, and several people in the crowd frowned even more deeply. A tourist from another country muttered under his breath, "This is shameful. No respect." Another woman turned her back, unwilling to watch what she knew could end badly. The royal guard, still seated tall on his horse, did not flinch. His face remained firm, his body still as a statue. But behind the silence, his trained senses were sharp. He could feel the horse's growing tension through the reins. The soldier knew exactly what was happening, yet his discipline required him to remain calm until the right moment. For the rest of the crowd, the air grew heavier with unease. The palace gates, usually a place of awe and admiration, now felt tense and filled with an uncomfortable energy. Children clung to their parents. Couples stopped their conversations. Tourists held up their cameras, not sure whether they should record or simply watch. All the while, the arrogant man continued his act, mocking and laughing as if the guard and the horse were performers in a street show. What he didn't realize was that he was not just disturbing an animal, but disrespecting a tradition that had stood for centuries. The royal guard and his horse were not there for entertainment. They were symbols of duty, strength, and history. Yet at that moment, for the man and his friends, it was nothing more than a joke. And so, as the crowd held its breath and the horse's ears flicked nervously, the first part of the story reached its tense point. Something was building, and everyone could sense it. The guard's silence, the horse's shifting weight, and the arrogant man's taunts were leading toward a moment none of them would forget. The uneasy silence around Buckingham Palace deepened as the group of tourists refused to step back. The arrogant man, still in the center, looked proud of himself. He seemed to enjoy the way people stared at him, though most eyes were filled with disapproval. He tilted his head back and laughed loudly, as if he had just pulled off a clever trick. His laughter echoed against the palace walls, cutting through the respectful quiet of the morning. The horse shifted again, its head turning slightly as its nostrils flared. Anyone familiar with animals could see it was becoming agitated. Its large hooves pressed against the cobblestones with a sharper sound now, a warning that it did not like the disturbance. Still, the guard remained motionless, sitting tall, his face showing no emotion. That was the duty of a royal guard, to endure distractions without breaking composure. But the tourists saw his stillness as weakness. The arrogant man leaned closer to the horse, his grin wide. "See? He's not going to do a thing," he said to his friends. "He's trained not to move, and the horse won't hurt me. It's all an act." One of the younger men in the group chuckled nervously. "I don't know, man. That horse looks pretty strong. Maybe we should stop." The arrogant man shook his head. "You're scared for nothing. This is London, not the Wild West. They're not going to let some horse kick a tourist. I'm fine." He then clapped his hands again, louder this time, sending a sharp sound into the horse's ears. The horse jerked its head back slightly, and its ears pinned for a moment. The crowd gasped softly again. A few people stepped further away from the railing, worried that the horse might lash out if provoked too far. The arrogant man laughed louder. "Did you see that?" He flinched. "They say these guards never move, but even their horses can't take it. This is too easy." The tourists around him laughed, though the sound was thinner now, less confident. Some of them looked around, realizing that the rest of the crowd was not amused. A mother nearby pulled her children away from the scene, shaking her head at the lack of respect. A man whispered angrily to his wife, "This is a royal tradition, not a circus. How can people behave this way?" The arrogant man ignored it all. He had no interest in respect or tradition. He wanted attention. So he went further. He puckered his lips and made whistling sounds, sharp and high-pitched. The horse flicked its ears back again, clearly irritated. Then he stomped his foot on the ground, mimicking the sound of a hoof. His friends chuckled, but their laughter was uneasy, glancing at each other with nervous expressions. One of the women whispered, "What if they arrest us? We could get in trouble." But the man only laughed louder, tossing his sunglasses higher up his nose. "Arrest us for what? Making noises? Come on, they can't do that." He leaned closer to the horse and waved his hands, making silly noises like a child. The horse snorted suddenly, a powerful burst of breath that startled even some of the people further back in the crowd. The arrogant man stepped back for just a second, but then covered his unease with another laugh. The boy, who had been clutching his mother's hand earlier, tugged at her arm. "Mom, why doesn't someone stop him?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The mother sighed softly. "Sometimes people don't realize how dangerous their actions are until it's too late. We just have to wait and see." The horse shuffled its hooves again, its polished tack clinking with the movement. Its great dark eyes flashed with alertness, watching the man who wouldn't leave it alone. Still, the guard remained calm, his discipline unbroken. His gloved hand stayed steady on the reins, though anyone watching closely could see the faint tension in his arms. He was ready if the horse needed to be controlled quickly. The arrogant man was thrilled by the reaction. He turned to the crowd and shouted, "See? He doesn't like me, but he won't do anything. They're too scared of losing their jobs to fight back." His words carried across the square, reaching the ears of every visitor, and many shook their heads in disgust. Still, no one stepped forward. Everyone knew the guards were trained to handle situations, and they didn't want to interfere. Yet the air felt heavier now, like a rope stretched too tight. Something was going to happen, and the crowd could sense it. The man clapped again, then whistled directly at the horse's ear. The horse raised its head high this time, pulling slightly at the bit in its mouth. Its nostrils flared wide, and it shifted its weight from one side to the other. The sound of its hooves against the ground was sharper, louder. The tension in the square grew, and some people gasped again. A few of the tourists in the group finally pulled back. "Okay, enough," one of them muttered, looking uneasy. "You're pushing it too far. We don't want trouble." But the arrogant man waved them off. "Relax, nothing's going to happen. They're statues. Just watch, I'll make the horse bow to me." He bent forward, moving his hand toward the horse's face, fingers stretching out as though to touch it. The crowd gasped sharply this time, a wave of alarm running through the people gathered. Parents called their children back. Cameras lifted into the air, recording the moment, because everyone knew this was crossing a serious line. The horse snorted again, stamping one of its front hooves down with a heavy thud that echoed through the square. The arrogant man froze for a second, startled, but quickly forced a laugh. "Whoa, easy there, big guy," he said mockingly. The guard, silent until now, tightened his grip on the reins. His jaw clenched, but his face remained composed. His eyes, though hidden beneath the shadow of his tall black hat, were fixed sharply on the man. He did not speak yet, but the energy in his posture had changed. He was alert, ready. The rest of the crowd, however, could feel their own anxiety rising. Some whispered, "Why doesn't he stop?" Others muttered about disrespect and danger. One man shook his head and said firmly, "He has no idea what he's messing with. That horse is trained, but it's still an animal. It won't put up with this forever." But the arrogant man continued. He waved his hands, clapped again, and leaned forward, trying to draw a reaction from both the horse and the guard. His friends laughed weakly, though their eyes darted nervously to the horse's powerful legs. None of them wanted to be standing there if things turned bad. The horse shifted once more, its tail flicking sharply. Its ears went back, its large head tossing slightly in irritation. The sound of its heavy breathing filled the air. The crowd fell silent, all eyes on the moment that hung on the edge of something about to break. The arrogant man grinned, proud of his show. He believed he was in control, that he had proven his point. But everyone else could see what he could not. The horse's patience was running out, and the guard's silence was not weakness, but discipline. The scene had shifted from amusement to unease. The tourists' laughter no longer filled the air. Instead, there was the heavy sound of hooves striking the ground and the nervous whispers of the crowd. Something was building, and it was clear the next moment could change everything. The square outside Buckingham Palace had fallen into a heavy silence. What had begun as light-hearted excitement among the crowd was now tense and uneasy. Parents pulled their children back, couples stood frozen, and tourists who had come for pictures now found themselves holding their breath. All eyes stayed fixed on the arrogant man, who had pushed his luck far beyond what was safe. His laughter had grown thinner, yet his pride would not allow him to step away. He stretched out his hand toward the horse, trying to touch its face. The horse immediately jerked its head up, shaking its mane, and snorted loudly. The sound made the air vibrate like a warning shot. The arrogant man staggered back a step, but quickly covered it with another laugh. "Whoa, easy, easy," he said, pretending he wasn't shaken. His friends chuckled nervously, though most of them were clearly uneasy. The crowd gasped as the horse stomped its front hoof down with force, the sharp clack echoing against the cobblestones. It was the kind of sound that made people's skin prickle. The boy who had been holding his mother's hand hid behind her leg, whispering, "Mom, it's angry." His mother nodded slowly. "Yes, sweetheart." Very angry. Finally, the guard spoke. His voice was firm, deep, and carried a weight that made even the loudest tourist freeze. "Stand back from the horse." The command rang out loud and sharp, cutting across the square. The arrogant man's laughter died instantly. His sunglasses slipped slightly down his nose as he blinked at the soldier in shock. The guard's voice was unlike anything the man expected. It was not weak or polite. It was strong, authoritative, and commanding, like thunder rolling across the ground. The crowd, who had been silently praying for someone to intervene, felt a wave of relief. The soldier had spoken and the air shifted. The arrogant man stepped back, but he tried to save face. "Relax, man. I was just having fun," he muttered, his voice lower now, almost defensive. His friends looked away, embarrassed by his behavior. The guard, however, showed no emotion. His eyes were forward again, his posture unbroken. Yet everyone knew that moment had changed everything. His warning had been clear, and no one doubted he would act again if the tourists crossed another line. The horse, though still unsettled, steadied slightly under the guard's firm hands. Its ears flicked back and its tail swished, but it stayed in control. The connection between guard and horse was clear. The soldier's calm discipline was keeping the animal steady, even in the face of disrespect. The crowd broke into soft whispers, their relief mixing with admiration. "Did you hear that?" one man said. "Finally, someone put him in his place." Another woman shook her head. That man had no respect. He could have been hurt. The arrogant man, however, still felt the sting of embarrassment. His pride didn't allow him to back down completely. He straightened his jacket and said to his friends, "See? He talked. They're not supposed to talk. Guess I won." But his voice lacked the boldness it had carried before. He was rattled, even if he refused to admit it. His friends didn't respond. They were too shaken to laugh, and most of them had stepped back, clearly not wanting to be part of his show anymore. Some glanced nervously at the police officers who patrolled nearby, wondering if they might intervene if the man caused more trouble. The young boy who had been scared now looked at the guard with wide eyes. To him, the guard was no longer just a man on a horse. He was a protector, calm, powerful, and brave. "He's like a real hero," the boy whispered softly. His mother smiled faintly. "Yes, that's what true discipline looks like." Meanwhile, the arrogant man crossed his arms, trying to act unaffected, though the truth was written on his face. The guard's voice still echoed in his ears. For the first time that morning, he realized the situation might not be a harmless joke. The crowd's energy shifted even more when the horse gave a loud, heavy snort and stomped again. The sound was almost like a statement. Enough was enough. The tourists nearest to the arrogant man backed away quickly, not wanting to be caught in whatever might happen next. The arrogant man swallowed, his bravado faltering. He muttered to his friends, "Okay, maybe we should go." But before he could turn fully away, he caught sight of the cameras pointed at him. Many tourists had been recording the entire scene. Phones were lifted high, lenses focused, capturing every second of his foolishness. His pride flared again. He couldn't walk away looking weak in front of the cameras, so he smirked and puffed his chest out. "It's just a horse," he said loudly, though his voice cracked slightly. "What's everyone so worried about?" The crowd murmured in disapproval. A man near the front finally spoke up. "Because you don't taunt an animal that size. It's dangerous. And it's disrespectful." The arrogant man rolled his eyes, but he couldn't hide the red flush creeping across his face. His act was crumbling, and everyone knew it. The guard stayed silent now, his warning given. His horse stood tall, breathing heavily but under control. The strength and dignity of both soldier and animal seemed to shine brighter after the chaos. They were not statues, as the arrogant man had claimed. They were disciplined, trained, and ready, symbols of tradition that demanded respect. The crowd's attention shifted away from the tourists' arrogance to the guard's power and calm. Quiet admiration filled the air. Some people even clapped softly, not in applause of entertainment, but as a gesture of respect. The arrogant man lowered his head slightly, realizing he had become the villain of the moment. His friends avoided his gaze, unwilling to defend him. The lesson had begun sinking in. This was not a joke, and he was not the star. He was simply the fool who had taunted a royal guard's horse and been put in his place. The square slowly returned to a more natural rhythm. Tourists resumed taking respectful photos. Children pointed with wonder at the guards, and families continued to admire the palace. Yet a new layer of respect hung in the air. Everyone had just witnessed what discipline meant, not only in the guard's silence but in the way he chose the exact right moment to speak. For many, it was a reminder that traditions carry weight. The guards were not there to be mocked. They were there as symbols of history and dedication. The horse was not a pet to be teased, but a partner trained to stand proud and strong. And as the arrogant man stood quietly now, his pride broken, the crowd knew this story would spread far beyond the gates. It would be told again and again. The day arrogant tourists taunted a royal guard's horse and were silenced by the shocking power of a single commanding voice. The moment after the guard's sharp command hung in the air like thunder rolling across a quiet valley. The square outside Buckingham Palace, usually filled with light chatter and clicking cameras, was silent. Everyone was waiting, watching, sensing that something more was about to happen. The arrogant tourist, who had earlier been so loud and full of pride, now stood stiff, his fake smile slipping from his face. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but the flush on his cheeks told the truth. He had been shaken, yet pride is a heavy thing to swallow. The man's friends whispered nervously, urging him to stop. "Come on, let's just go," one muttered, tugging at his sleeve. Another added, "It's enough. Everyone's looking at us." "You don't want trouble." But the arrogant man glanced around and saw dozens of cameras pointed in his direction. Phones were raised high, capturing every moment. He could already imagine the videos spreading online, people laughing at him if he looked like he had backed down. His pride flared again and he puffed out his chest. "Relax, I wasn't doing anything serious," he said loudly, as though to defend himself to the crowd. "It's just a horse." The words, meant to make him look bold, only made the crowd more displeased. A murmur swept through them, voices whispering about his lack of respect. Some shook their heads, others muttered words of disappointment. Parents pulled their children closer, pointing quietly toward the guard as an example of dignity. The young boy who had been frightened earlier now looked at the soldier with shining admiration. "He's so brave," the child whispered, "and the horse is brave too." The horse shifted its stance then, as if responding to the tension in the air. Its great hooves struck the cobblestones with a forceful sound. The stomp echoed like a drum beat, making people jump slightly. Dust rose around the hoof, adding drama to the scene. The horse tossed its head sharply, its mane shaking, and released a loud snort that seemed almost like a warning growl. The arrogant man flinched, stepping back quickly, though he tried to cover it with a laugh. But the laugh was thin, nervous, and hollow. His friends had already begun backing away, their eyes wide. "I told you," one whispered urgently, "this isn't safe. That horse could crush you." The horse, powerful and trained, was not attacking, but its movements made it clear that it would not tolerate any more disrespect. Its muscles tightened, its tail swished with sharp flicks, and its ears pinned back. Even those who knew nothing about horses could see it was giving a strong warning. The royal guard sat tall and calm, his hands steady on the reins. Though the horse moved with power, the guard did not waver. His discipline and control were clear to all. He was not just a man in uniform. He was a protector, one with the animal he commanded. His silent strength only added to the awe the crowd now felt. Then came the moment no one expected. The horse let out a deep, loud snort and pawed the ground aggressively, its hoof striking with a force that rang through the square. The movement was so sudden, so sharp, that many in the crowd gasped aloud. Some stepped back quickly, afraid it might leap forward. The arrogant man stumbled in shock, nearly tripping over his own feet. His prideful smirk was gone, replaced with wide eyes of fear. The crowd began to murmur louder. Cameras recorded the entire event, capturing the arrogance, the warning, and now the shocking display of the horse's strength. Whispers filled the air. "That horse is powerful. He shouldn't have messed with it. Now he'll understand." But even as the horse showed its strength, the guard never lost control. His calm posture and steady hands kept the animal from going too far. He sat like a pillar of discipline, showing everyone that while the horse was powerful, it was not wild. It was trained, loyal, and protective. Together, man and horse showed a bond that was built on respect and years of practice. The little boy in the crowd clapped softly, his fear turning to amazement. "Mom," he whispered, "the horse is like a soldier too." His mother smiled gently, Yes, darling. That's exactly right. Nearby, a police officer had stepped forward, watching closely. He did not need to intervene yet, for the guard had full control, but his presence was a silent reminder to the tourists. This was not a place to play games. Respect was not optional here. It was expected. The arrogant man, breathing faster now, looked around. The crowd's eyes burned into him, not with laughter but with judgment. He had become the lesson everyone was watching. His friends whispered urgently, "It's over. Let's go before it gets worse." Finally, his shoulders slumped. The arrogance drained from his face, leaving behind something closer to embarrassment. He mumbled, Fine, let's go," and began to back away. But the moment would not be forgotten so easily. The horse gave one last sharp stomp, its hooves ringing like a final statement before standing tall and still again. The guard remained unmoved, his composure perfect, as though nothing had happened. It was a striking contrast, the wild pride of the tourist against the unshaken discipline of the soldier and his horse. Then, slowly, a ripple of applause spread through the crowd. It was not loud or mocking, it was soft, respectful. Visitors clapped not for entertainment, but for the dignity and strength they had witnessed. They honored the guard for his composure and the horse for its proud discipline. The applause carried through the square, echoing softly against the palace walls. The arrogant man turned red, his pride now fully crushed. He pulled his jacket tighter and lowered his head, moving away quickly with his friends. He muttered under his breath, but no one paid attention to him anymore. The crowd's respect was fixed on the guard and his horse, who stood like timeless symbols of tradition and strength. For the visitors who remained, the moment was unforgettable. Cameras had captured it, yes, but the true memory was carved into their hearts. They had witnessed not just a tourist making a fool of himself, but the living proof of discipline, respect, and the quiet power of tradition. The boy looked up at his mother once more, eyes shining. "When I grow up, I want to be strong like him," he said. His mother smiled and hugged his shoulders. Strength doesn't come from shouting or mocking. It comes from control and respect. Remember that. As the morning sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the palace gates, the scene felt complete. The arrogant man had been silenced, the horse had shown its strength, and the guard had stood tall, never breaking his duty. For the crowd, it was a lesson they would never forget. The arrogant tourists walked away from the palace gates with their heads low, their laughter completely gone. The man who had mocked the horse earlier no longer looked proud. His face was red, his voice was quiet, and his steps were fast, as though he wanted to disappear from everyone's eyes. His friends followed closely behind, whispering nervously to each other. None of them dared to turn back. They had come expecting to leave with funny videos and loud stories, but instead they left with shame clinging to their shoulders. The crowd, however, stayed. Their eyes remained on the royal guard and his horse. The pair stood tall, as calm and disciplined as they had been from the beginning. It was as though the entire scene had never disturbed them. The guard's hands rested lightly on the reins, his posture straight, his eyes fixed forward. The horse, too, stood proudly, its breathing steady again, its dark coat shining in the sunlight that had now broken through the clouds. Together they were the perfect image of control and dignity. Soft murmurs ran through the square. People spoke in low voices, sharing their thoughts about what they had just seen. A woman turned to her husband and said, "That man will never forget this day, and honestly, neither will I." The husband nodded. He thought the guards were statues, but today he learned they are living symbols. That soldier didn't move until the exact right moment. That's real strength. The young boy who had been so frightened earlier now looked inspired. His wide eyes were fixed on the guard as he whispered to his mother, "He didn't get angry, Mom. He just stayed strong." Even the horse listened to him. His mother smiled gently. That's because real strength is not about shouting or mocking. It's about staying calm when others lose control. That is why people respect them. More people began to talk about respect, discipline, and tradition. Parents explained to their children why it was important to honor the guards and their horses. Couples reflected on the lesson they had just witnessed. Travelers from other countries nodded in agreement, saying they would carry the story home with them as a reminder that history and tradition are not things to be treated lightly. The cameras, of course, had captured everything. Many visitors had been recording the moment from start to finish. Already, people were typing quickly on their phones, sending videos to friends, uploading clips to social media, and writing captions about what had happened. Tourist mocks Royal Guard's horse and instantly regrets it, one caption read. Another person typed, unbelievable disrespect, watch how the guard and horse respond. The videos spread fast, shared by hundreds within minutes. For the guard himself, none of this mattered. He was not there for attention nor for applause. His duty was simple and clear, to protect tradition, to stand with discipline, and to keep the dignity of his post. He did not flinch when people mocked him, and he did not smile when people clapped. He simply continued to stand, calm and composed, because that was what his role demanded. His silence, his control, and his patience spoke louder than any words could. The horse, too, seemed to understand. Though it had shown its strength with stomps and snorts, it now stood still once again, proud and steady. It was a reminder that animals, too, had their limits, and that respect must always be given to creatures of such size and power. But under the guidance of the guard, the horse had shown not chaos but discipline. It was not wild. It was noble. The applause from earlier still lingered in people's hearts. No one clapped now, for the moment had passed, but the respect remained strong. Visitors continued to take photos, but their faces were more serious, more thoughtful than before. They no longer looked at the guards as silent statues, but as living examples of honor and control. As the arrogant tourists disappeared into the crowd, whispers about them faded. Soon the focus returned entirely to the palace, the guards, and the tradition they carried. The lesson had been given, and the ones who needed it most had walked away in shame. Hours later, as the day continued, the videos began to spread across the internet. In different countries, on different screens, people watched the moment unfold. Millions saw the arrogant man mocking the horse. Millions saw the guard's sudden command, and millions saw the horse's powerful reaction. Comment sections filled quickly. Some wrote, "This is why you don't mess with royal guards." Others said, "Respect the tradition, or face the consequences." One comment read, "The guard didn't even need to move, just one command was enough." Incredible discipline. The video was shared on news sites, blogs, and social platforms. Headlines appeared, "Tourist taunts Royal Guard's horse, instantly regrets it." Royal Guard's voice shuts down mocking tourist. Crowd applauds after tourist disrespects palace tradition. Everywhere the video traveled, people were reminded of the same lesson. Disrespecting tradition, animals, or people in uniform never ends well. The quiet power of the guard and the dignity of his horse became a message that spread far beyond the palace gates. Back at Buckingham Palace, though, life returned to normal. More tourists arrived. Families posed for photos, and children pointed at the guards with awe. The soldier who had faced the arrogant man earlier stood in the same position, unmoved, as if the entire event had never happened. That was his duty, to remain steady no matter what. The horse, too, stood calmly, its strong body a symbol of loyalty and tradition. For the people who had been there in person, the memory remained sharper than any video. They had felt the tension in the air, heard the thunder of the horse's hoof, and witnessed the guard's command echo across the square. It was not just something to watch on a screen. It was a lesson they carried home in their hearts. And for the arrogant man, though he tried to brush it off, the lesson followed him as well. No matter how many excuses he made, no matter how he tried to act like it was just a joke, the truth lingered inside him. He had stood before a royal guard, mocked centuries of tradition, and been humbled not by force but by dignity and discipline. That kind of lesson is not easily forgotten. In the end, the story became bigger than one man's arrogance. It became about respect, about how silence can be stronger than shouting, and how dignity can defeat pride without a fight. The guard and his horse had shown the world that true power does not need to boast. It simply stands tall, calm, and unshaken. The sun dipped lower over the palace that evening, casting golden light on the gates and the proud figures who stood before them. And though the crowd changed, though faces came and went, the memory of that morning remained. For those who had seen it, and for those who watched it later online, the lesson was the same. Never mock what deserves respect. Because sometimes, the most shocking thing of all is not a loud reaction, but the quiet strength of those who refuse to be moved.